Hello and welcome to Pennwriters Presents, our November episode. We are very happy and lucky to feature author and essayist and educator Shannon Reed. And I am joined, thank you for being here. I am joined by my co-host Rhonda Battenfelder. And we are excited to just kind of get rolling here with Shannon. So Shannon is the author of one of my favorite books of 2020, Why Did I Get a B? And other mysteries we're discussing in the faculty lounge. Shannon, do you want to start by telling us a little bit about Why Did I Get a B and sort of your experiences that led to writing this book?
Sure, absolutely. It's a book of memoir and humor, and it's about my 20-year teaching career. It starts at the moment when I became a teacher, which is how I sort of stumbled into teaching preschool in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, after I finished my undergraduate degree. It was not something I intended to do. It just sort of happened to me. But I fell in love with it, and I went on to teach preschool, both in Western Pennsylvania and then in Manhattan. And then I got my degree to teach high school English and theater, and I did that for 8 years at a little Catholic school out in Queens on the beach and at a public high school in South Brooklyn. And then I came to Pittsburgh and started teaching at Pitt while I worked on my MFA in creative writing. And that's where I still am now. I'm a professor of mostly fiction writing, but some humor writing as well. So the book looks at that kind of wacky journey that I certainly did not set out to be on, but found myself on. And I try to write a love letter to teachers because I think it's a profession that's often misunderstood, overlooked. And I wanted teachers to know that other teachers have their back and understand what it's like to have this difficult but beautiful profession. And then I also alternate in the book the memoir essays with humor pieces because I'm known as a humorist and I love to make everyone laugh, but especially teachers. I think we all need a good laugh.
Amen to that. Reading the book, I was really struck by how you could move so quickly from like making me laugh on one page to just all of a sudden I would tear up on the next. Like you would take me into this very emotional or painful experience right after I had just been like cracking up at this list of like different holidays that they were going to be celebrating at the school. What was the experience of putting this book together? Like, how did you think through the structure and order of it?
Yeah, I really wanted to have the experience that you're talking about. It delights me to hear that because for me, that's what teaching is. When I taught at the high school level, I would be counseling a student who was going through some incredibly difficult personal times, and I would weep with them. And then the bell would ring and they would have to go off to their next class. And a whole bunch of kids who had absolutely no interest that had just happened to me and we're just like, hey, woo, we want to pop off, came into the classroom. And I couldn't be like, no, I'm sad. I had to find it within myself to be where they were. So that was really deliberate. I wanted that experience of like all the different emotions that happened during the teaching day. And yeah, I tried to find, when I was looking through it, it became quickly clear to me that the essays were going to have to be chronological or they made no real sense. It didn't make sense to start with being a professor and then going to teaching preschool. So I kind of have them moving chronologically through my teaching career. And then I looked at the humor pieces and thought about, okay, which of these is really about teaching preschool? Which of these is like much more attuned to teaching at the college level, and figured out how to slot them in. And my editor was a tremendous help with that as well. She would send back notes that were like, these two things are strange next to each other. Like, don't put them next to each other. Or she would say something like, you know, we only have like 2 humor pieces for the college level. Like, why don't write something funny for the college level as well? And that was really helpful for me to have that second set of eyes to sort of perceive what was missing in the book. But yeah, it was as much assembly as it was writing, which was interesting.
Very interesting. Could you tell us a little bit more about your background as a writer? in addition to your education career? What sort of led you into writing humor and then writing memoir as well?
Absolutely. Like many writers, I'm sure most people who will watch this, I've always kind of been a writer. I liked writing stuff when I was a kid. I didn't really perceive of myself as ever being a professional writer. That seemed to be something that fancy people in New York City did. And I was not a fancy person in New York City. I was a pastor's daughter in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Like that wasn't going to happen for me. But I continued to just enjoy writing. And after I moved to New York to go to NYU, I stayed. And as I said, became a teacher there. And I was really missing an artistic experience of some kind. I just wasn't creating anything, and I felt strange about it. I felt like something was missing. And so I talked to my best friend, who's a frequent figure in my book as well, Andrew. We had gone to college together. We had been theater majors together. And I was sort of bemoaning my non-artistic output. And he said to me, you're a good actor, you're a good director, but you're a really great writer. You should maybe try writing stuff. And honestly, within 48 hours, I had written my first play. I was just like, okay, that's what I'll do. That sounds right. Andrew's correct. He's always right. I'll write a play. And I loved it. I wrote two short plays within a couple of weeks, and both were produced almost immediately afterwards. I mean, not Broadway or anything like that, but small theater groups in Brooklyn. And I was kind of like, oh, I guess I'm a writer. I guess this is what I do. And so I pursued playwriting for several years, and I really loved it, but I found eventually that I was not going to be able to have a professional career as a playwright. It's just really, really hard to do. And that I probably needed some time to develop my skills as a writer in a way that I just couldn't do on my own. And that's when I decided to start applying to MFA program. But I was 38 when I started applying, and I was like, I'm only doing this if someone gives me a free ride. If I get to get an MFA for free, yes, I will go. Otherwise, I won't. And it's another long story to go into, but I was lucky enough that Pitt did offer me a full ride, so I was able to come to Pitt. And they didn't have a playwriting major, so I wrote some fiction, and they took me on the fiction track. And I have rewarded them by almost solely writing nonfiction and humor instead, so I don't know. But in answer to the question about how I got started writing humor, when I was at Pitt in the MFA program, I loved it. I was learning so much. My professors, who are now my colleagues, are just the most amazing, warm, incredible teachers. And I really was learning so much. But I also felt very frustrated because fiction is intricate and difficult to write. And I am very much like the person who wants fast results. I'm very impatient. And I was like, oh, I've been working on these stories for months and they're still not ready to even submit anywhere. And I noticed that on Facebook, a lot of people were posting humor pieces from McSweeney's Internet Tendency. And I had no idea what it was. I was like, what's this? Oh, they're funny. Maybe I could write for them. And so I went to the submissions page and I saw they have very clear guidelines about how to submit. And I was like, yeah, what the hell? I'm going to submit something. And I submitted a piece. And I should mention that I was submitting short stories all the time to all kinds of different places. And I was constantly getting rejection letters. Sometimes they'd be like the nice rejection letters that were like, oh, try us again. But a lot of times they were just like, no, thank you. No, thank you. So I very much was of the attitude of like, this will be fine. They'll reject it and it'll be fine. I can survive this. So I submitted this piece to McSweeney's, and I got a note from the editor, who's still my editor there, who said, and he said in the note, we're not going to take this. You need to get to the joke faster. And I was like, I can get to the joke faster. I can do that. That's great. I can, it just seems like such a simple, actionable piece of writing advice. So I wrote another one, submitted it again. He gave me another piece. He said no, but he gave me another piece of advice. And then the third one I submitted, he took. And I was like, oh, I guess I read humor. Great. This is great. And I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, but I think the key for people who are building their writing careers to just have that kind of openness of like Sure, I'll try that. Maybe it won't work out, but maybe it will. And at least I'll learn something along the way. I'll teach myself something about my writing talent and my writing skill. And maybe I'll find out like, oh, no, I'm not a poet. Or maybe I'll find out like, hey, if I work on it and I'm willing to put the work in and can risk rejection, I can write humor. So that's how it all started.
This is so inspirational. So thank you for sharing all of the pieces of your journey, because I just love soaking in, hearing about how you got to such wonderful places in your career in a very diverse way. Thinking about all of these different projects that you were working on, can you tell us about some of your favorites?
Oh boy. I think that like a mother, I'm not supposed to have a favorite, but I will say, I think one of my favorite pieces is the first piece that I have published in the New Yorker, which is, I'm going to get the title slightly wrong, but it's like Joss Whedon's The Sound of Music. And it was when the first Avenger movies were coming out. And it's like a spin on The Sound of Music as if Joss Whedon directed it. And I think why it's one of my favorites is because of the story. It's not this amazing story or anything, but it's just a story for me about persistence and luck and taking chances. And I will briefly tell that story, which is that, as many people probably know, the New Yorker has an open submission email address for humor pieces. Anybody can submit a humor piece to the New Yorker. And I started about I'm trying to think, probably in like 2013, shortly after my first McSweeney's piece was taken. I was like, oh, now I am a humor writer, so I will submit humor to the New Yorker. I don't lack for ego. That's my one strength. So
self-confidence.
Yeah, I mean, like, why not? Like, why not? So I submitted something to the New Yorker, and 3 months later, I got a rejection. Not just like, thank you, no. And so I did it again, submitted, got a rejection, did it again, submitted, got a rejection. That happened 3 or 4 times. Every 3 months, I would submit something. Every 3 months, the 3 months later, I would then get a no. And then possibly like the 4th or 5th time I submitted something, I got a rejection that said, but we liked it, please submit again. And I was like, what? Like it truly was one of the happiest moments of my writing career so far. It was like someone is alive and reading my work and taking it in. Oh, I can't believe it. So I submitted again. And it didn't take 3 months. About a month later, I got a rejection that said, we're not going to take this one, but from now on, you can submit directly to me. And it had the editor's email address. And again, overjoyed, like I couldn't believe it. And by the way, I have to say, like I kept trying to explain to people how exciting it was to be rejected. And they were like, writers are weird. And I was like, no, it was a good rejection. And they were like, okay, Shannon, like whatever you need to tell yourself. And then, so when I got that email, I sat down that day and I wrote Joss Whedon's The Sound of Music. I spent 5 hours working on it that day. And I sent it, and the editor accepted it 2 days later. And I was like, I'm a New Yorker writer. I write for the New Yorker. I had read that magazine since I was 14 years old, way before I had any understanding of what I was reading. I used to read it and just be like, if I can understand 30% of this, I'm doing pretty well. And they were going to publish me. So that probably is my favorite piece just from that experience. Every time I see that piece, I think about that. And I would also say that my other favorite piece is an essay that was published at a website that unfortunately has gone under now, but it was an personal essay that interspersed the story of my decision to have or not have children with research that I had done on medieval nuns for a medieval literature class at Pitt. It's called The Cloister and the Cradle. It's different from a lot of other stuff that I write. It's actually not that dissimilar to some of what's in Why Did I Have a Bee, but it has a more serious tone to it. And I loved writing it. I loved using what I had learned in that class. And I'm just really proud of that essay, even though it's not like the typical Shannon Reed style.
Wonderful. I have to look those up now. I'm going to Google as soon as we end the call. What would you say, what would you describe as unique about your career especially given the way that you're balancing two careers?
Yeah, my students and I actually talk about this a lot. Not so much my particular career, but how to build a life that's meaningful while kind of waiting for writerly success to come to you. And I kind of feel like there are basically two ways to build a career in the arts. I'm not sure that this is fantastic, but I think right now in America, the two ways are you can either do kind of grunt work during the day, and devote most of your mental and emotional energy to doing your artwork when you can. There are a lot of actors in New York, at least pre-pandemic, who did this, who were waitressing and were working in an office. Work that I'm not saying that they did badly or that it is unmeaningful, but it was not what they had intended to do with their lives. They were really preparing for something else. And then they tried to do their art when they could. And I saw a lot of my theater friends from college doing that. And I knew it wasn't going to be the right choice for me. I think it's great for people who can. I have many successful friends from college who did that. But I was like, I can't just sort of do grunt work. I need to do something meaningful with my life while I'm sort of building whatever kind of artist I'm going to be. Keeping in mind, of course, that I did not have the surety of what my art practice was going to be, like my friends did. So that was part of it as well. And so I built a career as a teacher. And so when I talk to my students about that, I talk about the pluses and minuses of that. The pluses were that I have never wanted I've never been worried about whether I was going to be able to feed myself. I have always had something meaningful to do. Even if I just had like 5 rejections in a row, I could go into the classroom and have a meaningful day with my students and know that if it wasn't a terrible day, I had, moved them along in the educational process. But the drawback is that I didn't get my MFA. I didn't start my MFA program until I was 38 years old. And I do feel perpetually kind of behind the curve in that sense. When I go on Twitter, I see like 30 writers under 35 or 40 writers under 40. And I'm like, well, I'm 46. Like, I'm not going to hit those sort of, like early career things seem to have weirdly passed me by. And I'm not trying to complain about that. I'm just saying like that's part of the trade-off that I've made by being like, I'm going to have both of these careers. Neither career has been able to just have my total focus and attention at all times. I'm always balancing between the two. But I do think, especially now that I'm teaching creative writing, I think that's meaningful to my students. And I think it makes me a better professor because I'm out there with them trying to do that work and getting rejections and getting acceptances and thinking about the new novels and, doing things like this instead of writing lesson plans. And I think that finding that balance is a great model for them to see. Not that many people, in fact, almost no one can just be like, I'm a writer now, and that's how I will make my living, the end, sadly.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting that you bring up kind of the youth culture that we see in a lot of aspects of our society, but particularly in the arts. I saw one that was like 6 young adult writers, like 6 bestsellers under 25. And I was like, shut the front door.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because like for what you write for this gorgeous book, you couldn't have written that at 25. Like Why Did I Get a B so unique, I think, and special is the depth that you bring to it.
Yeah, I hope so. And I think that's true. And I just in general feel that it's just too bad for our society and our culture that we don't encourage people over 35 to continue their education. Because I think when and 35 is kind of an arbitrary date. I'm not saying at 35 something changes within you, but like when you get to a certain age, you start to realize what your interests and talents actually are in a way that 18-year-olds often just do not know. I certainly did not know. And I see my students sort of like, I don't know. And going back for a degree at that age can be such a meaningful experience and such a wonderful thing for younger students to see, for the professors to work with, but we just culturally just don't do that. We're like, nope, you finish your education by the time you're 30 and that's it. It's too bad. In a lot of fields, I think it would be great if more people did it.
I agree. It's such an excellent point. after listening to all of these little bits and pieces of what you've been working on, are you able to give us a sneak peek of what you're currently working on?
I'm working on too many things. Yeah, absolutely. So this semester I've been working on writing a screenplay, which is something that I have never written before. I just found myself kind of missing playwriting. And when I was like, oh, I'm going to work on a play. And when I started writing the play, I realized that I was writing not stage directions, but camera direction. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm writing a screenplay. And it's taking me back to that process I was talking about earlier in the interview where I was like, maybe I'll write humor. Like, I don't know, we'll see. I've been teaching Intro to Creative Writing, which is a new class for me. It's not a new class at Pitt, but I have all of these students who are like, I think I'm a writer, or I might like to write, but I don't know what I'm gonna do. And so we look at poetry and fiction and nonfiction and audio and digital narratives and playwriting and humor. And I think that kind of got under my skin, and I was like, I want to try something new too. Like, I want to do something, I don't know what I'm doing. So I've been working on this screenplay. I'm also working on a proposal for my second book, which is going to be a follow-up to Why Did I Get a B? Where I look at literature that I've loved to teach, and especially how my students have influenced that or affected the way that I've thought about the literature that I've tried to teach to them. Very excited about that. And I'm perpetually working on a novel about a funny feminist female spy. We'll see if it ever comes into existence, but I love working on it. I just come back to it every few weeks like, oh yeah, I love this. So yeah, I'm working on too much. I'm also grading and finishing up the semester at Pitt because we're done so early this year. We only have a week and a half more to go. Yeah.
Yeah. What a year. And that's sort of the next question we've got here is how has 2020, living in 2020, impacted your career, the way that you write, the way that you see the world, and with your book coming out in 2020? What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was, I'll talk about the book first. I'm just so thrilled that it actually came into existence and the book exists and that people were able to go and buy it. Because my publishing company, I have to say, like, never swayed in their belief that the book was going to come out on time. Like, nobody ever made me nervous about that in any way. But I spend too much time on social media. And I saw lots of people being like, the books are stuck in China, or like the book publishing industry is ruined. And I was like, what's going to happen? So that actually really lowered my bar to just like, can the book exist in the world? So it can. So that's great. I'm happy about that. It was through, People Magazine chose it as their book of the week. And that was super exciting. Even I have lots and lots of friends who have nothing to do with writing or publishing at all. And they know People Magazine. So they were like, oh, you actually achieved, we don't know what McSweeney's is, but yay, People Magazine. So that was nice. And I also feel like in general, there's a feeling across the publishing industry that books that came out in the spring and summer of 2020 kind of get a pass in terms of how they do. Just because it's, if you can't leave your home, you can't buy a book. I mean, I guess you can, but it's probably not your first priority. So I feel some hope that perhaps books that came out this year will be allowed, like those authors will not be judged too harshly if their book has not sold exceptionally well. We'll see. So yeah, that's how the book did. It's coming out in paperback in June of next year, which I'm excited about. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to do more online or possibly in person, but definitely online events. As you can see, I'm a chatterbox and I love chatting about writing and the book and everything. And I would just love to do more of that. Personally, 2020 has been a difficult year. Yeah, I've had a lot of health issues that were kind of spontaneously arriving in the midst of the pandemic. And I spent a lot of time this summer just thinking about the strangeness of being sick in the way that wasn't like the important way to be sick and just what that meant. It reminded me when I was in New York I lived through 9/11 in New York, and I had a close friend pass away just like, well, 3 or 4 weeks before 9/11. And the strangeness of being in the city that was mourning and in grief, and being part of that mourning and in grief, but also having this sort of side little pocket of grief that was just for me and her family, and just the complexity of that. It reminded me of that, the sort of like how we each have these own little pockets of pandemic within this huge global pandemic, and that it's just difficult for everyone. And it's been very helpful for me to remember that as I'm trying to teach this year, and to not get overly frustrated with my students who just don't have the energy or the bandwidth to do work at the level that I know that they would like to be doing. But we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and that's every person has their own little pocket of grief that they're dealing with in that. So in that sense, it's been helpful. And I'm really grateful to have meaningful work to do that allows me to touch these emotions and talk to people about them. I have a lot of theater friends who are out of work, and it's rough. It's rough, but I'm grateful to not have that particular worry on my plate. It's always the talking about COVID always brings the mood down to like, I felt this in my classroom, so we were all kind of like, so I guess what I would say is I'm looking forward to not hearing the COVID sigh anymore, the COVID 2020 sigh. I'm looking forward to that time when we're not all like at the end of it.
Yeah.
Collective sigh that we all have.
Mm.
What about what advice would you give a writer starting out? And would that advice be the same for somebody who's finding their voice at around 18 or even younger, or someone who's really finding their passion, over that 35, 45, 55 age range?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think my advice is terribly different, except that I think that people who are older should embrace the fact that they have a whole lifetime worth of experience. Well, not a lifetime, half a lifetime, whatever, years of experience to call upon, and that they should not hesitate to use that in their work as much as possible. What I see in my students, even my most talented 18, 19, 20-year-old students, is a sense of looking for what their topic is going to be. They don't know they know how to write, and they know what good writing is, but they don't know what they personally want to write about, what their voice is going to be yet. And I think older writers in general have more access to that. It's not hard for me to figure out that I should write about teaching because I've been doing that for 20 years. And I think when you're 20, it's harder to figure that out. So that's a great advantage that older writers have. But all writers, you need to read all the time. If you don't like reading, you probably are not going to love being a writer, because it's just kind of reading with a more active component to it. So I highly advise people, and I always tell my students I'm not a snob about what you read. If you love sci-fi, if you love fantasy, if you love whodunit mysteries, and that's what you want to write, read those, go for it. Because you will, to go back to the New Yorker, I read the New Yorker for over 20 years. It's not a coincidence that I'm now writing for the New Yorker, right? Like that style seeped into me. So let the stuff that you're reading seep into you. If you want to write literary fiction, you should be reading literary fiction. If you don't like reading literary fiction, why do you want to write literary fiction? I think about that a lot. And I know a lot of people will say you should write every day. I don't know if that's the best advice. I think that can sometimes turn into not bad habits, not the right way to put it, but just something you sort of like check off without really thinking about, like, oh, I did it, so now I'm a writer. I did that for today. And I think it's more meaningful to like engage with what you're writing about. So I would encourage people to find something that has a deadline that they have to meet, so that they are writing not just when they feel like it, not just when the muse hits and they feel passionate about it, but they're producing work even when they're not especially in the mood to do so. That might mean writing book reviews. It might mean working for a student newspaper. There's all different kinds of writing out there, websites, having a blog of your own, maintaining a Medium feed. All of those things are valid ways of writing, but you have to teach yourself to write both when you're super excited about it and feel motivated, and also when you're not excited and you don't know what you're going to say and you don't really have enough time. You have to learn to do both those kinds of writing if that's what you want, if you want to be a professional writer. If you don't want to be a professional writer, you can write whatever you want. It's fantastic. You can keep it as a passion, and that's totally valid too. And in fact, I will say, like, some of my students do come to that realization that they don't want to treat writing like a job. They would rather have it just be a pure passion. And that's fantastic. They should do that if that's what they want.
That's great advice. So like you mentioned, the COVID sigh. So let's look beyond the pandemic and the winter that is ahead. And let's think about next summer when you've got paperback coming out. What are you hopeful for in the next year or two? What are you aspiring to personally, professionally? What do you want to see in the world for writers and for everyone?
Oh boy.
Big question.
Wow. Puppies for everyone and free chocolate all around. I'm not a huge goal setter for myself as a writer. I just kind of think of myself as moving relentlessly forward. And just whatever form that particularly takes. I feel like that has served me well in my career thus far, to not be, if I had gone into getting my MFA, like, I will be a fiction writer, I will publish a novel, that is the only way writing is meaningful to me, then I would be very unhappy because I haven't done those things. I haven't published a novel. So I try to really be open to the winds of change and see like where my career is going next. I'm excited about the screenplay. I'm excited about the second book proposal. More globally, I was thinking a lot this past week about how little art we've seen coming out of Washington, D.C. over the last 4 years. I don't want to make this deeply political, but just because it's not just a case of who's been in power, but what has gotten media coverage and that kind of thing. And so I'm hopeful. So I was thinking, I have students who are in their first year, so they're 17 or 18 years old, and they basically have not in their adult lives seen arts and culture held forth as things, as qualities of our nation that are worth honoring and celebrating. So I'm hopeful that we will start seeing that, because I think after the pandemic, during the pandemic, so many of us have had the chance to reflect on the fact that what has gotten us through is art. Watching that television show, listening to music, dancing around the living room, making the bread dough into a beautiful shape, painting the house. These are all arts and culture, right? That book that kept us riveted during those 2 hours where we really just wanted to go outside and talk to someone, anyone. All of that has kept us going. And I would love to see that recognized and celebrated, so that perhaps the next generation of artists are not having to choose between a kind of job that they don't especially want to do while they do their art on the side, or a career that's not especially meaningful to them when they would rather be writing or creating in some way. That's my hope.
I love that. Thank you. Shannon, I'm hoping to ask you one of my favorite questions, if you don't mind. Do you see yourself as a pantser or a plotter? And can you talk about your writing process?
What are my choices? A what or a plotter?
A pantser, like, are you just writing from an idea in your head, or are you plotting out before you?
I am a mix, I would say. Am I allowed to be a mix? Is that allowable?
Absolutely.
You're anything you want.
Yeah, so when I write nonfiction and humor, I tend to have the idea and sit down and just write. And I find usually, it's not that I write a perfect first draft and I'm done, but usually the structure that I start with is the structure that I keep through the end of the piece. I rarely am like, oh no, I would need to move this section over here. It's just refining and finishing what I've written. Fiction, I'm much more, I'm much more tentative, and I think it's because of my playwriting background. I'm always sort of like, who are these people and what are they saying to each other? Who are they? And so that caused, like, so I inch along and then I pull back and kind of refine and sort of then plot. Like, I'll be like, oh, I think she wants this, but he wants this. So maybe what happens is okay, I got to start again, but now I know these characters better. So yeah, I'm kind of like inch, go back, inch, go back, and plotting in that sense. It's not very efficient. My students and I are always like, fiction writing is not an efficient process at all. And I think we're all constantly looking for like the thing that's going to like, oh, this time I'll plot it out, or this time I'll do that. And they help. People work in different ways and they're all totally valid, but it's just an inefficient process. It takes a long time, unfortunately. It goes against my nature.
I'm going to call back to sort of a question from earlier. Your favorite work. Do you have a favorite piece or part of Why Did I Get a B?
Whew.
And I know it's like picking a favorite child, and they're all beautiful and gorgeous.
Sophie's choice questions, y'all. I will say that there's a piece called To Stand with Love, which is a letter I wrote to a student who died while I was, not while I was teaching him, but he was my student and he died. And I'm proud of that piece because I thought about writing it and did not write it for 6-7 years. I just did not. I knew I wanted to write about him, but I didn't know what I wanted to write. And I had tried to write some other things sort of obliquely that referenced his death, but they were not really what I wanted to say to him. And finally, with the deadline looming for the book, I knew I had put it in there in the table of contents that I was going to write this. I set myself that challenge. And so I sat down and I just wrote that letter. And I did change some parts of it. It's not exactly as it is in the book, but it was about 90% there. And I think it was just because it had been churning away within me for all those years to figure out what it is I wanted to say, what are the references I want to make, what did I want, if I could talk to him, what would I say? So I'm proud of that piece. It was a difficult one to write. And I'm very fond of it. And in happier news, I'm very fond of, there's a monologue in there, a first person piece called It's Cooking Day at Preschool. And it's in the voice of a preschool teacher who's trying to do cooking day with her kids at preschool. And it's not going well at all. And I, it reminds me, it's an extreme version of when I taught preschool, and I haven't done that for so many years. And I was just so delighted to go back into that headspace of thinking about all those kids and trying to corral everybody and get this thing done. And is it even like, is anyone learning anything? And does it matter? They're 3 years old, like whatever, just get through this. The New Yorker chose that piece as their excerpt from the book. And I was really happy to see it get that wider audience because I love it.
I remember both of those pieces. And with the cooking in preschool, I think something that really shines a light on your script writing experience is the way that you could use a monologue, one person speaking, and really illustrate everything that's going on around them in this chaotic tornado of mixing bowls and measuring cups and
bad choices.
Great.
All around. One of the things that's really, one of the reasons I like that piece so much is it feels like it is a monologue, and it technically, like you're saying, it is a monologue. It's a first person piece. But I also am able to see that it actually wouldn't work on stage that well. It has to be a written piece. And I'm proud of myself for being able to differentiate. Like I'm at the stage in my writing career where I know like this is for the stage and this is for the page. And I can tell the difference between the two. It makes me feel when I teach my students something that like I have some actual authority and I'm just not just kind of like, I don't know, what do you guys think? I'm like, oh no, stage things do this, page things do this. Got it. These are different. It's always nice to feel that you've grown in your art form in some way, right? So I can see.
I feel like you have the makings of a craft book there, like the stage and the page.
Maybe I've been dying to teach a class at Pitt that uses playwriting techniques for fiction and nonfiction writers. I think it would be fascinating. Unfortunately, it is premised on the idea that we could go to the many wonderful theaters in Pittsburgh and see shows there, and then use that to talk about, like, what does it look like on the page? What did it look like when we saw it? What does it look like when we're reading it aloud? And our poor theaters are shuttered right now. So I guess that's something else I'm looking forward to after the pandemic, being able to teach that class, and oh my goodness, being able to go to live culture and theater again.
Yes. Hear, hear. Well, I think that's all I've got on my little agenda here. Rhonda, any further questions from you?
I don't have any further questions, but this was just a fascinating morning for me. So I'm really grateful for your time, because as someone who's
Lathering on for
well,
me. I'm glad you feel that way.
but yeah, as somebody who's an educator and working on, finding my voice and being in that crowd of, older writers starting out, I am extremely grateful for your honesty this morning and your help, because I feel very inspired and motivated. And I'm sure a lot of other people watching, no matter where they are in their life or their career, we all have something to bring to the table. And I'm grateful for that reminder this morning. So thank you.
Glad to hear that. And I would just say, like, to, the one kind of insistent thing that I did early on in my career is I was like, I said to myself and to others, teaching is worth writing about. There was a time when there was not humor about teaching. People were not writing about teaching in a way that wasn't sort of like inspiration for the teacher. And so I would say to everyone, especially older writers, you have a topic, something's important. Maybe the writing world isn't agreeing with you right now, but it's important. You write about that because you have that knowledge, and we need that knowledge.
Well said. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared. It's been a delight, Shannon. Thank you.
I'm delighted too. I hope that everyone who's watching this goes out and has a fantastic day.
All right, well, I'm going to stop the feed now. So for Pennwriters Presents, I'm Joy Gibbons with Rhonda Battenfelder, and today Shannon Reed. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.